I stood in the kitchen doorway, the pot roast still steaming on the table behind me as my daughter's laughter echoed down the walkway. The porch light buzzed above, flickering like it couldn't decide whether to die or stay alive, just like her opinion of me. "You're halfway in the grave already," she had said, raising her wine glass like a toast to my end. Halfway. As if 35 years of night shifts and bailing her out of messes only got me halfway to mattering. Wait, before we go any further, I gotta ask, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. The pot roast steamed in the center of the table, its rich scent mingling with rosemary, garlic, and something darker, tension, bitter and metallic as blood on the tongue. Forks scraped plates, ice clinked in glasses. But Helen Carver heard only the silence between heartbeats, the quiet hum of something ugly waiting to be born. Denise leaned back in her chair, swirling wine in a stemless glass she hadn't offered to pour for anyone else. Her lips curled into a smirk so thin it could slice. "You know, Mom," she said, the words slow and soaked in poison. "You're halfway in the grave already. Maybe it's time we talked about what happens after Paul barked out a laugh, the kind that bounced off the kitchen tile and clanged like cheap silver." He raised his glass to no one in particular. "To the future," he said with a grin. "And to early planning, right, babe?" Chloe dropped her fork with a sharp clatter. The 14-year-old's eyes flicked toward her grandmother, then back to her untouched green beans. Her lips pressed into a thin line. She didn't say a word. Helen didn't flinch, didn't blink. Her hands, weathered, knotted from years of nursing and arthritis, remained folded neatly on the table. She stared at Denise, eyes steady and cool, as if measuring not her daughter's words, but her weight in lies. "Well," Helen said quietly, reaching for her water glass, "I suppose planning does have its advantages." Paul rolled his eyes. Denise popped a bite of roast into her mouth like it was her last meal, chewing with open smugness. "Don't get all dramatic, Mother. We're just being practical outside." The sprinklers kicked on in a whispery hiss, spraying the browning lawn with rhythmic defiance. Helen's old house, a modest ranch on a sleepy Sacramento street, had seen its share of laughter and arguments. But tonight, the dining room walls felt too tight, too close, like they were listening. When the plates were cleared and the fake politeness had dissolved into passive barbs about Helen's driving, her memory, the thermostat, and her outdated filing system, the Carvers left. Paul didn't thank her. Denise blew an air kiss from the front steps. Chloe lingered a second longer, mouthing a silent, "I'm sorry," before the door closed behind them. Later, when the porch light buzzed against the dark and Helen sat in her recliner with a cup of chamomile that had gone cold, Irene Brooks knocked twice before letting herself in. She didn't wait to be invited. "I brought lemon bars," Irene announced, setting a tin on the coffee table and collapsing onto the couch like she owned it. She was wearing her housecoat and judgment like armor. "I didn't ask for sweets," Helen said, not looking up from her ledger. "You didn't have to." I smelled that dinner from across the yard and figured something foul happened. Irene leaned forward. "So, what did she say this time?" Helen finally glanced up. "She looked me dead in the eye and said I was halfway in the grave." Irene's eyebrows shot up. "The gall." Paul laughed. "Of course he did." Helen set her cup down, slow and deliberate. "And Chloe?" She froze, like she'd seen someone kick a dog. Smart girl. Got a better compass than the rest of her bloodline. Irene reached for her tin, pried it open. "That smirk's gonna cost her." Helen's mouth twitched at the corners, not quite a smile. It already has. In the quiet that followed, the grandfather clock in the hallway ticked like a heartbeat growing louder. Later, alone in the dim glow of her study lamp, Helen opened her navy blue leather journal. She turned past budgets and grocery lists, past medical notes and phone logs. Tonight she began a new section. With precise strokes, she wrote the date, the time, and Denise's exact words. She underlined them once, then twice. Beneath that, she wrote, "Tonight she buried herself." Then she closed the journal, locked it in her drawer, and extinguished the light. Her face unreadable in the dark, but her eyes wide open. The morning after dinner tasted like burnt toast and old betrayal. Helen sat at her kitchen table, the faint ache in her knuckles reminding her that arthritis didn't take weekends off. She turned on the lamp above her ledger, its glow casting a sharp circle over the navy blue journal she'd opened the night before. Page 2, a fresh line. October 18th, 7:43 p.m. Denise, you're halfway in the grave already. She wrote it slowly, with the kind of precision she used to apply to morphine dosages. One mistake, and it's fatal. The weight of ink on paper felt heavy, permanent. She paused, then added a small notation beneath it. Paul laughed. Chloe startled. She hadn't expected to write more that morning, but then she opened the silverware drawer. A small folded square of paper was tucked behind the napkin holder. Helen unfolded it gently. The handwriting was unsure, leaning too far to the left, and written in pencil. I'm sorry. Mom's awful. Helen closed her eyes. Her breath hitched once. Then she tucked the note between the journal pages and pressed it flat. The kitchen smelled like cinnamon tea and dust. Outside, the wind kicked up leaves across the sidewalk in small, frantic circles. She didn't call Irene. She just walked across the street, coat buttoned, purse in hand. Irene opened the door without a word and stepped aside, her floral robe dragging slightly across the carpet. I brought donuts, Helen said. I just started coffee, Irene answered. 10 minutes later, they sat across from each other at Irene's round dining table. No TV, no radio, just the slow gurgle of the percolator and the occasional car passing by. She meant it, Helen said. Of course she did. I'm tired, Irene. Irene's eyes narrowed. Tired doesn't mean done. You were a nurse for 35 years. You wiped blood off walls and pulled glass out of drunk men's backs. You know how to handle pain. Helen looked at her, unmoved. Pain is one thing. Watching your daughter turn into a vulture is another. Irene leaned forward. Then you don't wait for her to pick the bones clean. Start recording. Every insult, every theft, every twisted little smile. Helen sipped her coffee. You think a notebook will stop her? No, Irene said, smirking. But it'll bury her when the time comes. Helen tilted her head, a glint of something colder than bitterness flashing in her eyes. Then I'll bury her in her own words. When Helen returned home, the sky was beginning to bruise, deep streaks of violet stretching across the Sacramento horizon. She sat at her desk again and added another note. 8:15 a.m. Found note from Chloe. I'm sorry, Mom's awful, placed between napkins. She looked at her handwriting, steady, unfaltering, and let herself feel it. The odd sensation of control slowly returning, not through confrontation, but through precision. Later that evening, as she reviewed her monthly expenses, something sharp and wrong stood out. A $600 debit transaction at an electronics store. She didn't shop there. She didn't even own a flat screen. Helen checked the timestamp. 3:06 p.m. She hadn't left the house. Her breath slowed. She opened her wallet. The card was missing. Heart knocking like a soft hammer against her ribs, she called the bank. The wait music chirped obliviously through the receiver. She held the phone steady. A young man finally answered. Yes, ma'am. The charge came from a store in Arden Fair Mall. The card was swiped in person. Driver's license verified. Helen's voice was calm, even as her hand tightened around the edge of the counter. Describe the person, please. Blonde. Mid to late 30s. Said she was your daughter. Helen thanked him, hung up, and stood for a long moment in the quiet. The refrigerator hummed. The faucet dripped once. Somewhere across the street, a dog barked twice and then stopped. She looked at her journal again, open to the next blank line, but she didn't write anything. Not yet. She would tomorrow. The morning air carried the bitter smell of scorched leaves and overripe citrus. Helen stood at her dining table, reading her bank statement again. Line by line, like a nurse scanning vitals for signs of trauma. The $600 withdrawal still sat there, mocking her in bold black ink. Arden Electronics, $600.47. She hadn't stepped foot in that mall in years. The kettle whistled sharply from the kitchen, but she let it scream. Her eyes didn't leave the statement. The date matched. The time matched. She was home that day, feeding the cat, sorting prescriptions, noting down utility bill due dates in her planner. Denise had stopped by briefly, supposedly to check in. Helen turned from the table, lifted the kettle off the burner, and let the steam hiss into silence. Then she picked up the phone, dialed the bank's local branch, and waited. A calm voice answered. "This is Brian. How can I assist you?" Helen cleared her throat. "I have a charge on my account I didn't make. Arden Electronics, October 18th, $600. Clicking on the other end. Then a pause. "Yes, ma'am." That was an in-person transaction. Card was swiped. ID verified. Helen's grip tightened on the receiver. Verified by who? There was another pause. "A woman named Denise Carver. She identified herself as your daughter." Helen didn't blink. "Did she sign anything?" "Yes, ma'am." Standard authorization. It matched prior signatures on file. "Thank you," Helen said, voice clipped. "I'd like a printed statement of that transaction." And a notarized incident report. She hung up before he could ask if she wanted to dispute it. That could wait. By mid-afternoon, Paul was parked outside her house in his dented Chevy, one leg slung out the driver's side, as if the world owed him comfort. Helen stepped outside, envelope in hand. "You're welcome," he called as she approached. "For what?" Paul grinned, too wide. "Denise said you were getting senile. Said you probably forgot she needed the money. New laptop for Chloe's school. Grocery runs. You know, life." "That wasn't her money," Helen said evenly. He raised both hands, mocking innocence. "Come on, it's not like she's a stranger. You owe us for all we do. You think Chloe just babysits herself when you're off napping." Helen said nothing. Her eyes flicked to the passenger seat, where an empty soda cup and fast food wrappers were scattered across the floor. No laptop, no groceries. Paul chuckled, tapping the side of the car like it was part of the punchline. "Don't be dramatic." "It's family." Helen held his stare for 3 long seconds before turning and walking back inside. Irene came over the moment she saw Paul pull away. "That grin on his face," she muttered. "I wanted to slap it off with a broom." Helen handed her the bank envelope. Irene flipped it open and whistled through her teeth. "They didn't even bother to hide it." "Nope." "You're gonna report her." Helen shook her head. "Not yet." Irene frowned. "Why not?" Helen tapped the envelope. "First, I document." That's how you beat snakes. You wait for them to shed enough skin to hang themselves. Irene's face softened, just slightly. "You always were surgical when it counted." They drove to the UPS store downtown and used the copier in the back. Helen made 3 copies of the statement, stapled, dated, and labeled each one in tidy block print. Original. Fraud transaction. She slid one into her journal, one into her home safe, and one into a manila folder marked Denise Evidence. It was nearly dusk when she returned the bank's call to confirm her mailing address for the official documents. "Before we hang up," Brian said, voice suddenly hesitant, "there's something else you should know." Helen's spine straightened. "Yes?" He lowered his voice. "Your daughter came in yesterday. She didn't just swipe your card. She asked to be added to your checking account as a joint holder." Helen stood motionless, her fingers tightening around the cordless phone. "She brought a forged authorization form," Brian added quietly. "We flagged it and denied the request. But we thought you should know. She's trying to gain full control." Helen's lips parted slightly. The edges of her vision sharpened like a scalpel to skin. "Thank you, Brian," she said, eyes already narrowing toward tomorrow. "You've just confirmed everything I needed to know." The next morning, Helen stepped through the glass doors of Pacific Heritage Credit Union, wearing her tan blazer and flats polished to a dull shine. The lobby smelled faintly of lemon-scented cleaner and fresh printer ink, a sterile calm that soothed her nerves. A young woman with a blonde bun and coral lipstick greeted her at the desk. "I need to open a private account," Helen said. "Checking and savings. Single holder. No joint access. And I want it fully insulated from existing linked profiles." The banker blinked. "Of course, ma'am. May I ask why?" Helen looked her square in the eye. "Because someone I raised thinks I won't notice when they start digging my grave through my wallet." The woman didn't ask again. An hour later, Helen left the bank with a slim folder in hand, her name printed cleanly across new account forms. She'd moved every dollar from her old checking into the new one, transferred savings, closed off overdraft access. She even had the Social Security representative on the phone, firmly and politely, rerouting her monthly deposits before the next cycle. She didn't flinch. Not once. By afternoon, she was in her study, sliding the old checkbooks into the shredder. The whir of the blades was mechanical and brutal, soothing in its finality. She double-checked the changes on her laptop, then closed it and let herself exhale. The calm didn't last long. At 5:47 p.m., her front door shook under a loud, open palm slam. Helen didn't startle. She rose slowly, smoothed her blouse, and opened the door just wide enough to see her daughter's fury boiling beneath caked-on makeup. "You moved the money?" Denise barked. "What the hell is wrong with you?" Behind her, Paul leaned against their truck, arms crossed, jaw tight, watching. Helen stepped onto the porch, closing the door behind her. "That account was mine. You used it without permission." Denise threw up her hands. "It was $600, Mom. $600. You sit on that savings like you're some damn Rockefeller." "It wasn't yours," Helen said, her voice even. "So I moved it." "You've lost your mind," Denise snapped. "This is elder abuse. Financial confusion. Oh, you don't even know what you're doing anymore." From the sidewalk, Paul added with a smirk, "We might have to look into getting power of attorney." For her own safety, the words hung in the air like a guillotine waiting to drop. Then from the side yard, a small voice called out, "I wouldn't do that if I were you." All three turned. Chloe stood beneath the plum tree, backpack still slung over one shoulder, earbuds dangling from her neck. She looked directly at her mother. Trying to take over her money after stealing from her isn't a great look. Denise's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. "What are you even talking about? Go inside." Chloe didn't budge. "I heard you last night. You said, 'We'll get control over the whole thing soon.'" Then Paul laughed. Paul's expression darkened. "Watch your mouth, kid." Helen stepped between them, shielding Chloe without touching her. Her voice dropped low, steel under velvet. "This is private property. You are no longer welcome here without an invitation. Consider this formal notice." Denise's face flushed crimson. "You're cutting us off." "I'm protecting what I've built." Helen turned and opened the door, not bothering to watch them leave. Inside, Chloe slipped her backpack off and dropped onto the couch with a sigh. "I'm sorry, Grandma." "You didn't do anything wrong," Helen said softly. Later that night, after Chloe had gone to bed and Irene had called to check in, her version of a neighborhood patrol, Helen stood in front of the hallway closet. The scent of cedar and mothballs drifted from the open door as she pulled down a small fireproof lockbox. She sat on the floor and opened it with a key that never left her chain. Inside, neatly folded and protected in plastic, was the original deed to the house, signed and notarized from 1981. Her name, and only her name, etched into the title. She held it up to the lamp, light catching the raised seal like gold. They wanted power of attorney. Helen smiled faintly. She had power of ownership. The office smelled like leather-bound justice and freshly brewed spite. Thick wood bookshelves loomed behind the polished oak desk, lined with legal volumes and framed degrees. Sunlight leaked through the tall blinds in clean stripes across the floor, cutting shadows that felt sharper than Helen's thoughts. She sat across from Martin Wells, her estate attorney for over 20 years, her handbag zipped tight beside her, like a vault of secrets. "I'm ready," she said, no hesitation in her voice. Martin, graying at the temples but still razor-sharp behind his wire-rimmed glasses, looked over the top of a yellow legal pad. "You're sure?" Helen tilted her head. "I brought statements. Bank records, notes, a copy of the attempted account takeover, and this." She reached into her bag and laid the lockbox deed on the table. "They've taken what they could. I'm making sure they don't get what matters." Martin nodded once. Then he opened a fresh folder. "Let's get to work." They went line by line through the existing will, a document first drafted when Chloe was in diapers and Denise still pretended to care. Martin struck Denise's name from the primary beneficiary line. He did the same with Paul's. Then, using meticulous language like a surgeon removing a tumor, they rewrote the structure entirely, a full trust established in Chloe's name. Untouchable until her 21st birthday, held in confidence by a third-party fiduciary. Contingency clause: if anything happened to Chloe before then, the remaining estate would be donated to the Sacramento Nurses Legacy Scholarship Fund, in Helen's honor. Martin leaned back, pen resting between his fingers. "And you're including a no-contest clause. That means if Denise or anyone else tries to challenge the will, they get nothing. No share, no second chance. Are you certain?" Helen didn't blink. "Put it in ink." He began typing. The keys clacked like nails into a coffin. Helen sat in silence, listening to the future take shape. One where Chloe thrived, not scavenged, and where Denise's hands came away empty no matter how deep she dug. "Most people," Martin said, not looking up, "wait until they're on oxygen to do this." "You're doing it while walking tall. Good," Helen replied. "I want to be around to watch it hold." Martin smiled at that. "Paper's safer than memory. When people lose both, that's when vultures start circling." Helen opened her journal and slid it across the desk. "These are direct quotes. Dates, times, even what she wore when she called me useless." He took it, scanning a few entries before nodding solemnly. "This helps. If she ever claims you're senile, this reads like the mind of a damn chess master." Helen closed her purse with a snap. "She smirked at my grave." I carved hers on paper. Martin printed the documents on thick parchment stock, his printer humming with quiet urgency. Helen signed the final pages with a smooth, deliberate stroke, her handwriting firm. Martin signed next, then notarized each section with practiced efficiency. When they were done, the entire will was tucked into a secure, fireproof envelope. He handed her a copy. "Keep it in the safe." "I intend to." "And Helen," she turned, "you're doing this clean. No revenge tantrums, no fraud, just strategy. Judges respect that. I'm not after blood," she said softly, "just balance." Outside, the heat had started to break. Leaves rustled down the sidewalk in lazy spirals. Helen walked to her car with a straight back and a clear conscience. That evening, as the sun fell behind the oak trees, Chloe sat at the kitchen counter doing homework, while Helen diced carrots for stew. The air smelled of thyme and quiet peace. Then the mail arrived. Helen flipped through bills and grocery flyers until her fingers froze on a thick cream envelope, stamped in red. Superior Court of California. Guardianship petition enclosed. She opened it slowly. Inside was a motion filed by Denise Carver, claiming Helen Carver was no longer competent to manage her finances or health, requesting full guardianship, conservatorship, and control of her estate in the interest of safety. Chloe watched her from across the counter, eyebrows lifting. Helen folded the document once, then twice. She didn't curse, she didn't pace. She simply said she just dug the second half of her own grave. The courtroom smelled like pine-scented floor polish and nerves. Helen sat upright at the plaintiff's table, hands folded calmly in her lap, her silver hair pinned back in a no-nonsense twist. Across from her, Denise tugged at the collar of her too-tight blazer like she hadn't expected the air in a courtroom to be quite this thick. A bailiff announced the judge's entrance. Everyone rose. The gavel cracked once. "This is a guardianship petition hearing in the matter of Helen Carver," Judge Rowley said, glancing over his glasses at the stack of documents in front of him. Petitioner alleges that Ms. Carver is no longer mentally competent to manage her own affairs. Helen didn't move. Not when Denise's lawyer began spouting phrases like cognitive decline, concerns for safety, or increasing confusion. Not even when Denise dabbed a tissue at the corner of her dry eyes and sniffled for the judge's benefit. But when Martin Wells stood up beside her, Helen felt every ounce of the tension slide from her shoulders. He carried a manila folder like it was a sword. "Your Honor, we have medical documentation, dated journals, notarized estate documents, and bank records showing clear, coherent financial behavior over the last 18 months. We also request a formal court-ordered evaluation, administered by an impartial medical professional." The judge nodded. "Granted. Evaluation will be conducted within the week. This court takes conservatorship very seriously." Helen locked eyes with Denise for the first time that morning. Her daughter smiled, tight, smug, like she'd already picked out drapes for her mother's bedroom. 3 days later, Helen sat in a small windowless office across from Dr. Allison Gentry, a clinical psychologist in her 40s, with crow's feet from too many years of listening and not enough years of being heard. The room was painted a neutral beige, quiet except for the gentle hum of a ceiling fan. "I'm going to ask you a series of memory, logic, and reasoning questions," the doctor said gently. "Answer in your own time." Helen nodded once. "Whenever you're ready." They started with numbers, dates, word recall, then a problem-solving scenario involving a misplaced prescription bottle and a mistaken pharmacy. Helen didn't just answer, she clarified, she elaborated, she built scaffolding around each response, showing not just competence, but control. When asked to remember a list of unrelated words, she repeated them back with precision, and then alphabetized them for good measure. An hour later, Dr. Gentry leaned back in her chair, pen resting still. "You're in remarkable shape, Mrs. Carver." Helen raised an eyebrow. "Physically? Number. Mentally? Always." The doctor smiled. "I'll file my report this afternoon." Back in court, the tension returned like a cold draft. Denise looked confident again, until the judge read the evaluation summary aloud. Dr. Gentry concludes, "Mrs. Carver demonstrates full cognitive function, clear executive reasoning, and emotional stability. No signs of memory loss or impairment." Judge Rowley looked over his glasses at Denise. "That's about as definitive as it gets." Denise shifted, her smile twitching. "But she's been acting strange." "No," Martin cut in. "She's been acting careful." "There's a difference." Then Chloe stood. Her voice was soft but steady. "She's protecting herself from my mom. This isn't about concern, it's about money." Denise's head snapped around. "Chloe." "You said it," Chloe shot back. "In the car. Once we get power of attorney, we're set." "I heard it. I remember." The courtroom fell into a long, echoing silence. Judge Rowley cleared his throat and spoke with finality. "Case dismissed. No conservatorship granted." Petition denied. Helen exhaled without smiling. She didn't need to. The sound of Denise's plans crumbling was satisfaction enough. That evening, Helen returned home to the sound of quiet. Irene brought over peach cobbler and poured 2 glasses of sweet tea. Chloe sat curled up on the couch, flipping through old photo albums, half smiling at pictures of her younger self in overalls and gap-toothed grins. But something was off. Helen's hand trembled slightly as she reached for her pill organizer. The arthritis pain had been rising all day. She opened the drawer. Empty. Her bottles, 3 of them, were gone. She checked the bathroom cabinet. Nothing. Trash bin. Nothing. She scanned the kitchen. A chill threaded through her spine. Someone had thrown them out, and only one person knew exactly where she kept them. She moved through the house slowly, methodically. No misplaced containers. No accident. Someone had taken them, knowing what it would do. The screen door creaked open a moment later. Irene's voice rang from the porch like a warning bell. "Coffee's hot, and I brought those lemon scones you pretend not to like." Helen opened the door with her left hand, her right still stiff. "Come in." Irene stepped inside, immediately scanning her friend's face. "You look pale." "My meds are gone," Helen said. "All 3 bottles. Not expired. Not misplaced." Irene's jaw tightened. "You think, Denise," Helen cut in. "I know." An hour later, the 2 women stood in the grocery store parking lot. Irene had insisted they drive past Paul's truck, just in case the idiot was dumb enough to leave breadcrumbs in plain sight. It didn't take long. In the center console of Paul's dusty Dodge sat a familiar orange bottle. Its white cap cracked. Helen's name clearly printed on the label. Irene let out a slow whistle. "That's felony level dumb." "I need a photo," Helen muttered, pulling her phone from her cardigan pocket. She took several from different angles, capturing the name, the dosage, the expiration date. Then Irene reached forward, gently opening the unlocked door and snapping another photo of the others nestled beside it. 3 bottles, just sitting there like forgotten gum wrappers. Helen didn't say a word until they were back inside the car. Then, "That's not negligence. That's cruelty." Irene's voice was ice. "That's evidence." That night, Helen invited Denise over. It wasn't a trap, it was a trigger. She set her phone on the kitchen counter, screen dimmed, but recording. Denise arrived 15 minutes late in a puffy jacket that didn't match the weather. Her smile was syrup thick. "I heard you're not feeling well," she cooed. "What a shame. Getting older's such a beast." Helen said nothing, just gestured to the living room. "Sit." Denise flopped onto the couch, crossed her legs. "So, what's the emergency?" "My arthritis meds are gone," Helen said, flat. "All 3 prescriptions." Taken. Denise didn't blink. "You probably misplaced them." "I didn't." A pause. Then Denise tilted her head, lips twitching. "Well, maybe you don't need them. Half the time you just sit around anyway." Helen took a slow breath. "That's what you think?" Denise shrugged. "You've had it easy. I've got bills. Paul's job search isn't going great. And Chloe's always needing something. So you stole my medication." Denise laughed. "You're dramatic. You act like I cut your brakes." Helen pressed stop on her phone recording without even looking down. The next morning, she and Martin sat in his office once again. He listened to the audio 3 times. Didn't speak until the end. "That's elder exploitation," he said. "Clear, deliberate, and on record. Combined with the previous financial abuse, it's enough to request a full restraining order." "She won't stop," Helen said. "Not until she's legally locked out." Martin nodded. "Then let's make that happen." When Helen told Chloe, the girl stood still for a beat, her backpack slung over one shoulder. "Do you want me to testify again?" she asked quietly. Helen looked at her, truly looked. The courage in that small, open face, the strength behind those tired eyes. "Yes," she said, "but only if you're ready." Chloe nodded once. "I am." 4 days later, Judge Rowley signed the order in his chambers. Restraining order granted. Denise and Paul Carver were to have no contact, physical or digital. No visits, no access. Helen left the courthouse with the paper in her purse and sunlight on her face. She didn't see Denise parked 2 blocks away, watching her from behind the wheel, knuckles white on the steering wheel, eyes burning holes through the windshield. The hammering started before sunrise, deep metallic strikes echoing through the neighborhood like a slow, deliberate countdown. Helen stood in her foyer in slippers and a housecoat, arms crossed, watching the locksmith drill through the last of the old brass locks. The cool autumn air drifted through the cracked door, carrying the scent of fresh paint and sawdust from the neighbor's porch renovation. A new day, a new beginning, this one sealed in steel. Irene stood nearby with 2 thermoses of black coffee and her mouth full of vengeance. "I told him high-grade commercial-grade locks, deadbolts, interior too. If she tries to sneak in through the garage again, it'll be like trying to crack a bank vault." Thank you, Helen murmured. The locksmith, tall, bearded, soft-spoken, straightened and handed her a new key. All done, ma'am. These locks are pick-resistant and drill-proof. The whole system's reset. You're the only one with access. Helen slid the key into her cardigan pocket. That's exactly what I need. By mid-morning, Irene had helped her gather every spare key from drawers, boxes, and that little ceramic bowl by the phone that had once held candy. Helen tossed them, one by one, into a paper bag and set it ablaze in the outdoor fire pit. They watched them curl and blacken without a word. At 11:42 a.m., Denise arrived. Her black SUV pulled up to the curb too fast, tires biting the asphalt. She climbed out in heels and dark glasses, the click of her shoes slicing across the walkway as she stormed up the path. She pulled out her house key and jammed it into the lock. It didn't fit. She tried again, yanked harder. Helen opened the door just enough to meet her daughter's eyes. Denise's jaw dropped. What the hell? New locks, Helen said simply. You can't. This is my childhood home. Denise shoved the key again, now visibly shaking. You're insane. Helen stepped outside and closed the door behind her. Her tone never lifted. It's not your home. Not anymore. Paul's pickup roared up seconds later, parking halfway across the neighbor's lawn. He leapt out, furious and loud. Are you kidding me? This your idea of a joke? He stomped to the porch and pounded on the door with both fists. Let us in, Helen. This is harassment. You stole from me, she said, calm as glass. Then tried to take over my life. You have no legal claim here. I'm your son-in-law, Paul shouted. Helen didn't flinch. You're Chloe's burden, not mine. A small gasp came from behind the screen. Chloe stood in the hallway, backpack over her shoulder, frozen mid-step. Denise spotted her. Chloe, baby, tell her to stop this. We're family. Chloe stepped outside, slipping past her grandmother, her voice barely above a whisper. Family doesn't steal medication and bank accounts. Paul rolled his eyes. Oh, Helen's poisoned you too. No, Chloe said, stepping closer to her grandmother. You did that all on your own. She wrapped her arms around Helen's waist, the gesture quiet but absolute. The morning chill clung to her jacket, but she didn't move away. Irene appeared at the edge of the driveway, arms crossed, mouth tight with satisfaction. You're trespassing. Go before I call the cops. Denise's face crumbled, rage collapsing into disbelief. This isn't over. You're right, Helen said. It's only just beginning. They left in silence. That night, as Helen stirred soup on the stove and Chloe sat curled up with a textbook, the doorbell rang. A man in a gray suit stood on the porch, clipboard in hand. Mrs. Carver? She nodded. You've been listed as the primary victim in a new investigation. He handed her an official envelope. Denise Carver is being formally charged with financial exploitation of an elder. You may be called to testify. You'll be protected under the Elder Abuse and Dependent Adult Civil Protection Act. Helen took the summons slowly. Her fingers didn't tremble. Across the room, Chloe looked up. What is it? Helen set the envelope down on the table beside the new house key. Her voice was clear, strong, resolute. It's the sound of a door finally locking for good. The courtroom was cold, not in temperature, but in tone, the kind of sterile silence reserved for lives being disassembled piece by piece. Helen sat upright in a navy suit, her fingers folded neatly in her lap, the soft scent of lavender hand lotion clinging to her wrists. Across the aisle, Denise leaned toward her attorney with a whisper that sounded more like a hiss. Lips curled in the same smug smile she'd worn the night she joked about Helen's grave. But this time, Helen wasn't the one being buried. Martin Wells stood at the plaintiff's table, calm as a surgeon before incision. The evidence folder in his hand was thick, stapled timelines, notarized journals, photos of the stolen pills, digital bank statements, and the audio recording where Denise laughed about Helen not needing her medication. Your Honor, Martin began, voice crisp but measured. We are not here for a matter of confusion or miscommunication. We are here because of a sustained, deliberate effort by the defendant, Denise Carver, to exploit her elderly mother emotionally, medically, and financially. Denise rolled her eyes and muttered to her attorney. He shushed her. Martin handed over the journal pages. We've provided direct documentation. Dates, times, language used. This isn't hearsay. It's handwriting. He then clicked a small speaker on the table. Denise's voice filled the courtroom, shrill and dismissive. Maybe you don't need them. Half the time you just sit around. Anyway, the silence that followed was louder than her words. Helen didn't look at her daughter. She looked at the judge, steady and composed. Next came the bank records, withdrawals Denise made without permission. The flagged attempt to add herself to Helen's account. The forged signature she left behind like a fingerprint at a crime scene. Now let's be clear, Martin said, pacing slowly. This is not just about money. This is about control, about attempting to dismantle an independent woman's life from the inside out. He paused, then nodded. Chloe. Chloe stood, wearing a soft gray sweater and blue jeans, her hands shaking slightly, but her chin high. She looked no older than 14, but sounded much older when she spoke. I heard my mom say they'd take control of everything, Chloe said. She said, once we get power of attorney, we'll be set. She said Grandma was half gone anyway. Denise shot up. That's not true. She's lying. Sit down, Miss Carver, the judge barked. Outburst again and I'll hold you in contempt. Chloe's voice didn't falter. She also said Grandma was dramatic for needing her arthritis meds. She took them and left them in Paul's truck. I saw the bottles. I took pictures too. Helen closed her eyes for a breath. Not from sadness, relief. Chloe was no longer just a quiet ally. She was now a witness to history. Denise lunged forward, pointing at Chloe. You're ungrateful. You think she's perfect. She's manipulating you. Martin didn't flinch. Your Honor, the judge slammed his gavel once. Silence, Miss Carver. One more outburst, and you'll be escorted out. Denise sank back into her chair, her attorney whispering something urgent in her ear. She shoved his hand away. The judge turned his gaze toward Helen. Do you wish to speak? Helen stood. Her voice was low, firm, clear. I spent my life helping people, working hospital nights, losing sleep, doing what needed to be done. I never asked for much, certainly not from Denise. But she took anyway, not because she needed to, but because she thought I wouldn't stop her. Well, she was wrong. Denise's breathing was shallow now, panic crawling behind her eyes. She buried herself, Helen finished. I just handed her the shovel. The judge leaned back, folded his hands, and stared long at the defense table. Restraining order remains permanent. All previous charges stand. And based on the medical evidence, theft documentation, and intent to defraud, this court recognizes Denise Carver as legally disinherited under California Probate Code, Section 259, statutory disqualification of heir by elder financial abuse. Denise choked on air. Wait, what? The judge's voice did not waver. By law, you are now treated as having predeceased your mother. You are entitled to nothing from her estate. Paul stood halfway up, muttered something obscene, then stormed out. Denise remained frozen, mouth open, mascara smeared beneath her lower lashes. Helen didn't smile. She simply exhaled, because for the first time in years, her daughter was speechless. The courthouse doors hissed closed behind Helen as she stepped into the afternoon glare, the weight of judgment lifting off her shoulders like old dust. The heat of Sacramento pressed down on her cardigan, but she didn't mind. Beside her, Martin walked in silence, the final paperwork in a slim leather folder under his arm. It's official, he said, opening it just enough for her to see. The will stands uncontested. Chloe's trust is secure, and your daughter is legally excluded. Permanently, Helen didn't respond right away. She was watching the wind stir the flag above the courthouse steps. It flapped lazily, indifferent to the war just ended beneath it. Was she even in the room? Helen asked. Martin nodded. She sat in the back. Left before the judge finished reading the trust provisions. Of course she did. Helen's voice was unreadable. She never stays for the cleanup. They reached the parking lot, the smell of sun-baked asphalt mixing with exhaust. Martin handed her the envelope. Everything in here's locked down. Chloe gets full access on her 21st birthday. Until then, it's protected by court-appointed oversight. Helen's hand closed around it. It's more protection than I ever got. By the end of the week, the neighborhood buzzed like a kicked beehive. It wasn't just what Helen had done. It was how thoroughly she'd done it. Sacramento's suburban circles passed the story around like spiked lemonade. Denise's attempt to seize control of her mother's estate had not only failed, it had backfired spectacularly. Word got out, not just about the financial exploitation charge or the restraining order, but about the legal disinheritance, about being cut from the will by statute, about the daughter who had mocked her own mother's death and ended up erasing her own future instead. Helen caught fragments of it while gardening, whispers from neighbors slowing their morning walks, a lingering glance at the grocery store, a cashier who smiled a little wider than usual. Irene, of course, was less subtle. "She's broke," Irene said, flopping onto Helen's porch swing with a paper cup of iced tea. Flat broke, and it's public record now. Anyone who Googles her name finds the court summary. You should see her face when she walks into the bank. It's like she's dragging a ghost. Helen watered her rosemary bush, the scent fresh and sharp in the rising sun. That's not a ghost. That's consequence. Irene took a long sip and sighed with contentment. You know what I love about you? You didn't scream, didn't rant. You filed paperwork. You burned her down in silence. Helen gave a faint smile. Burial's done. Not quite, Irene muttered, eyes narrowing toward the street. A black SUV idled at the corner, engine rumbling low. Inside, Denise stared out the driver's side window. Makeup smeared, hair frayed. She looked thinner, smaller, like someone trying to stay relevant in a story that had already moved on. She's waiting for someone, Irene murmured. Helen didn't bother looking up. He won't come. Later that afternoon, as Chloe organized her school folders at the kitchen table, Helen heard a door slam from outside. She walked to the front window and watched. Paul was loading the last of his things into the back of his truck. A dented suitcase, a duffel bag, one of Denise's old wine racks, tossed unceremoniously into the bed like trash. Denise stood on the curb, yelling something Helen couldn't hear. Paul didn't yell back. He just climbed into the truck, shut the door, and drove off. No glance, no hesitation. Denise stayed where she was for a long time, her arms limp at her sides. Eventually, she staggered back into the SUV and disappeared down the street. Helen let the curtain fall. Chloe walked in a moment later, holding a math book and a sandwich. Everything okay? Helen nodded slowly. Just someone learning what it feels like to lose what they never appreciated. Chloe sat beside her quietly. Neither of them saw the torn envelope on Denise's passenger seat, the one with Paul's name on it, unopened, now fluttering in the wind like an afterthought. Denise showed up at Helen's porch the next morning, her face blotchy, her mascara smudged from sleep or crying, maybe both. The silence that followed Paul's departure had apparently rung too loudly in her ears. The knock came in two sharp bursts, followed by her voice. Mom, please, I need to talk. Helen stood behind the door for a moment, hand resting on the knob, not opening it yet. She wasn't surprised. This part always came after the abandonment, the rush to find a softer landing. She cracked the door just enough to see her. Denise looked wrecked. Pajama bottoms, hoodie inside out, her once slick hair now frizzed and unbrushed. He's gone, she rasped. Took everything, even the little things. Coffee filters, chargers. The good shampoo. Helen said nothing. I didn't think he'd actually do it, Denise whispered. I thought we'd fight. Like always. Then he'd cool off, sleep in the truck maybe. But this time, he just... She trailed off, eyes glazed. You were right. Helen didn't gloat. She didn't nod. She didn't let her face twist with the satisfaction she had every right to feel. I'm out of options, Denise said. I need help. Just to get through a few weeks. A little money, a place to sleep. I can't go back to Paul's sister. She hates me. Helen's voice, when it came, was quiet but razor sharp. You still think this is about weeks? Denise looked stunned. What? You buried me with words, Helen said flatly. Now you're trying to crawl out of the same grave. Denise reached for the doorframe. I'm your daughter. And Chloe is mine now, Helen replied. Denise's eyes widened. Helen gently closed the door, not with a slam, not in fury, but like lowering the lid on something already cold. Inside, Chloe sat on the couch with her textbook open but untouched. Her pen was still. She hadn't needed to ask who was at the door. You don't owe her anything, she said. Helen walked over and sat beside her. I know. Do you feel bad? I feel like I'm doing the thing she never could, protecting the people I love. Chloe nodded slowly. I hope one day she finally understands why. She won't, Helen said, but that's not my burden anymore. The rest of the day passed in small, quiet rhythms, peeling apples, sorting laundry, folding newspapers to line the compost bin. The weather had cooled just enough to open the windows, and the scent of Irene's rose bushes carried in on the breeze. By late afternoon, the doorbell rang again, but this time there was no panic behind it. Irene let herself in with her usual flair, a newspaper in one hand and a devilish grin on her face. Well, you're famous now, she announced. Helen raised an eyebrow. I was famous when I broke my hip at the senior center salsa class. This is better. Irene unfolded the Sacramento Chronicle and laid it on the table. A color photo of Helen, taken from her court appearance, sat above the fold. Headline: Justice in her hands. Sacramento woman uses law to outsmart financial abuse by her own daughter. Below it, a subheader: Court ruling disinherits daughter after landmark elder abuse case. Trust secured for granddaughter. Chloe looked up from the kitchen. Whoa! Helen scanned the article, which detailed the timeline, the court's ruling, and the legal precedent it might set. Her name was mentioned 5 times. Denise's, 12, and none favorably. She'll hate this, Irene said, sipping iced tea. Everyone in town's reading it. Even Sandra at the bank said she clipped it for her bad kid's scrapbook. Helen folded the paper in half and set it aside. Let her hate it. It's the first time anyone's printed something I didn't have to defend. Just then, Helen's phone buzzed on the counter. She picked it up, checked the screen, and blinked. Unknown number. Voicemail alert. She played it on speaker. Mrs. Carver, this is Jamie from Channel 6 News. We'd love to feature your story on our evening broadcast. Call us back if you're open to talking. Chloe's mouth dropped open. TV? Helen turned to Irene. Irene smirked. Well, now you really buried her. On air. The news van arrived just after 9. Tires crunching the gravel like a slow drum roll. Helen stood on her porch with a fresh cardigan, lipstick applied with steady hands, and hair brushed back, not for vanity, but for clarity. If her name was going to be spoken aloud on television, she intended to own every syllable of it. Chloe stood beside her in a clean denim jacket, visibly nervous but proud, hands stuffed into her pockets. Irene leaned against the porch railing, arms crossed like Helen's personal security detail. A young reporter named Jamie introduced herself with a firm handshake and a soft voice. Her crew set up cameras in the garden, where the sun fell gently across the rows of basil, rosemary, and lavender. Helen's small but stubborn sanctuary. Jamie glanced at her notes. This story has struck a nerve. We've had dozens of emails about it. It's not new, Helen said calmly. Just rarely confronted. The interview began on a gentle note. Childhood memories. Helen's decades as a nurse. Raising Denise as a single mother after her husband's heart attack. Then came the harder questions about the betrayal, the court case, the restraining order, the inheritance. Helen didn't flinch. Her voice remained level, her words deliberate. People don't see it when it happens quietly, when it's family. But exploitation doesn't always come with bruises. Sometimes it comes with smiles and handouts. Sometimes it calls you Mom. Jamie blinked, then leaned forward. How did you stay so composed through it all? I stopped needing her love, Helen said. And I started needing my dignity more. The final question was quiet. What would you say to someone watching this who's afraid to speak up? Helen's eyes didn't waver. Speak anyway. You don't need permission to protect yourself. You only need the will to outlast the ones trying to tear you down. The camera light clicked off. Jamie reached over and touched her hand. That might be the strongest thing I've heard all year. The piece aired that night. Prime time. 7 minutes and 42 seconds that unspooled years of pain into one clear, unapologetic account of resistance. The headline on the Channel 6 news site read, "Mother outsmarts daughter's exploitation attempt, leaves legacy for grandchild instead." Comments flooded in. Praise, outrage, admiration. She's a hero. Every elder should see this. That granddaughter is lucky to have her. This woman deserves a medal. At the grocery store, people stopped Helen in the aisle to shake her hand. At the pharmacy, the clerk gave her a discount just because. Even the bank manager, who once dismissed her concerns as family drama, called to say they'd reviewed their elder protection protocols and thanked her for her example. But nothing meant more than the moment Chloe turned from the TV after watching the segment and whispered, "I want to grow up to be like you." Helen felt the truth of it settle in her bones like warmth. "No, sweetheart," she said. "You'll grow up to be better." From the corner, Irene raised her iced tea like a toast. "Now that's a grave marker. Not stone, not flowers. Just facts and receipts broadcast at dinner," Helen chuckled. Her future's sealed now. Not with hate. With history, they all sat there, in the quiet glow of a home reclaimed. 2 mornings later, the mail arrived. Chloe fetched it as always, flipping through bills and catalogs until her fingers froze. "Grandma," Helen looked up from her coffee. "Yes?" "There's a letter, from Mom." Chloe held it out. No return address, but the handwriting was unmistakable. Helen stood in front of the fireplace, Denise's letter folded twice in her hand, like a confession too late to matter. The flames crackled behind the grate, slow and steady, casting long shadows that danced across the living room walls. The paper trembled slightly, not from her hand, but from the draft sneaking under the back door. Behind her, Chloe watched in silence. Helen unfolded the pages once more and read them again, not for clarity, but finality. "I didn't mean to hurt you, not like this. I was angry, I was drowning. I thought if I could just get ahead, I'd make it up to you later. I didn't think you'd fight back. I didn't think you'd win. You were always too strong for me. Even now, I don't know how to reach you, but I'm sorry. If there's still a version of me, worth knowing, I hope you'll call there were smudges at the bottom. Could have been tears, could have been ink, could have been strategy." Helen didn't blink. She slowly crouched, opened the fireplace screen, and laid the letter onto the burning log. It didn't catch immediately, just curled at the corners like it was resisting. But then the flames took hold. First the edges, then the loops of Denise's name at the bottom. The words blackened, then vanished. Behind her, Chloe exhaled. "That's where it belongs." Helen didn't turn. "There's no coming back from some things." "I know," Chloe said, but she doesn't. They stood there together, quiet as the paper turned to cinders, the heat warming their faces, the silence between them full of meaning. Irene appeared in the doorway a moment later, holding 2 mugs of cocoa and a look of smug vindication. "Please tell me that was what I think it was," she said. Helen straightened. "It was." Irene passed her a mug and raised her own. "Ashes to ashes." Helen sipped. The cocoa was too sweet. but the moment was just right. Later that afternoon, Martin stopped by, briefcase in hand and the faint smell of courthouse cologne still clinging to his jacket. "I saw the segment," he said, taking a seat across from her at the kitchen table. "You're officially the poster woman for estate empowerment. 3 clients have already asked if they can do what you did." Helen raised an eyebrow. "And can they? Legally? Yes. Morally? That's trickier. Most people aren't willing to walk away from family, even if that family's walking them straight off a cliff." She didn't respond. She didn't have to. Martin opened his briefcase, pulled out a stamped legal certificate. "Probate's officially closed. No appeals, no loose ends. You're untouchable now." Chloe, who had been listening from the hallway, stepped forward. "Does that mean it's all done?" Martin looked at her and smiled. "It means everything that could have been taken from your grandmother is now sealed so tight, not even a worm could sneak through." Helen looked down at the paper, her name, Chloe's trust, the deed, the clause that legally recognized Denise as disinherited under California statute. Final. "I buried her future," Helen said quietly. Martin nodded. With surgical precision, Chloe leaned against the wall, arms folded, eyes distant. "I wonder what she'll do now." Helen didn't answer, because it didn't matter. That evening, as dusk settled and the air cooled, Chloe appeared in the living room with a box tucked under her arm. She looked nervous, cheeks flushed, fingers gripping the edges like it might shatter if handled wrong. "I made something," she said, voice low. "It's not perfect, but I wanted you to have it." Helen turned away from the window, curious. Chloe placed the box on her lap. Inside was a handmade scrapbook, its pages thick and layered, photographs from Chloe's childhood, drawings, ticket stubs, handwritten notes. On one page, a sketch of Helen's house, porch swing and all, penciled in delicate detail. On another, a poem. "Roots grow strongest in broken ground. Love blooms in the hands that steady you. This isn't just my past, it's my map forward." Helen's breath caught. The final page was a collage of Polaroids, Chloe and Helen baking, walking through McKinley Park, laughing under blankets on movie night. In the center was a handwritten title, "You're My Legacy." Helen didn't speak. She simply reached forward and pulled Chloe into her arms. Outside, the wind shifted, pulling ash from the fireplace chimney into the cooling sky. Inside, Helen held the only thing worth keeping. And on the table beside her, Coco sat the last corner of the letter Denise had written. Now a fleck of black dust. Tomorrow something new would arrive in the mail. Something permanent, something sealed. The morning after the letter burned to ash, the house was unnervingly still. Not empty, just resting. It smelled faintly of cinnamon from the candle Chloe had lit in the kitchen and wood smoke lingering from the night before. Outside, the leaves were beginning to bronze, the first signs of Sacramento's slow surrender to fall. Helen sat at the dining table with her planner open but untouched. Her pen hovered above a blank to-do list that, for once, didn't scream with urgency. No court appointments, no bank meetings, no damage control. Just quiet. Chloe padded into the room in socks, carrying something behind her back. Her face was pink with anticipation, eyes glinting like a secret too precious to hold any longer. "Okay," she said. "Close your eyes." Helen raised an eyebrow but humored her, folding her hands in her lap. "No peeking." "I wouldn't dare." A moment passed. Then something soft and square was placed on her lap, thicker than a notebook, wrapped in tissue paper and bound with twine. Helen opened her eyes and looked down. "Go ahead," Chloe said. Helen untied the twine slowly, as if undoing it too quickly might ruin the meaning behind it. She peeled back the tissue and revealed a handcrafted scrapbook, hardcover, spiral-bound, and carefully weathered at the corners like it had already been loved. She turned the first page. A title cut from magazine letters and decorated with pressed lavender leaves read, "You're My Future." Helen's breath hitched. Her thumb paused on the edge of the page. The second page was a photo of the two of them in the garden. Helen holding a trowel. Chloe mid-laugh, dirt on her cheeks. The caption read, "You taught me how to grow things that last." The pages kept turning. Snapshots of them baking pies. Walking through the city park. Reading on the porch swing with a cat curled across Helen's lap. A drawing Chloe had done of their house. Wobbly lines, but careful strokes. Then, notes. Little sticky messages Chloe had saved over the years. "Good luck on your test. I love you. Don't let her make you bitter. You're stronger than they think." Helen pressed a palm over her chest, her ribs aching in a way they hadn't since her husband passed. This wasn't just a scrapbook. It was evidence. A living document of survival and legacy. "You like it?" Chloe asked, voice suddenly unsure. Helen blinked, tears gathering and spilling in silence. "It's beautiful." Chloe stepped forward and wrapped her arms around her. "You gave me everything when Mom didn't even know what she was stealing. This is my way of giving something back." Helen clutched her granddaughter tight. "You gave me back myself, Chloe." From the hallway, Irene leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, eyes wet. "You two are going to make me cry like a Hallmark special," she sniffed. "Martin and I brought a casserole, but honestly, this feels like the main course." Martin stepped in behind her with a chuckle, holding a glass dish covered in foil. "It smells like something important happened." Helen gestured to the scrapbook. "She made me a legacy." He flipped through the pages, nodding slowly. "That's not just a gift. That's protection in paper form. This will last longer than any deed." Helen touched the title page again. Burial wasn't the end. It was the beginning, Chloe smiled. "Of what?" "Of living like I'm finally free." They all sat down to eat, laughter low and steady like background music. Irene poured sweet tea. Martin removed his tie. Chloe brought out brownies she'd made herself, slightly overbaked, but full of effort. Then the doorbell rang. Helen glanced at the clock. No appointments, no deliveries scheduled. She rose, wiped her hands, and opened the front door. A mail carrier stood on the porch, holding a thick envelope. "Signature required, ma'am." Helen signed, took the envelope, and stepped back inside. She opened it carefully. Inside was the final deed confirmation, a state-stamped, sealed copy confirming the property was 100% in her name. Untouchable, uncontested, permanent. Beneath the certificate was a small handwritten note from Martin's office. "Now it's yours forever. Not just the house. The piece." Helen stared at the seal. For a long, still moment, she said nothing. Helen stood in the center of her living room, one hand gripping the silver frame, the other smoothing the parchment flat like it was delicate fabric. The deed shimmered faintly behind the glass. Official, notarized, state-stamped, and indisputable. Not just proof of ownership, but proof of survival. The house was hers, in every legal, moral, and unshakable sense. And now the world would see it. Chloe balanced on the arm of the couch, watching her grandmother carefully hang the frame above the mantel, just beneath the clock that hadn't ticked right in years. She leaned forward, squinting, measuring its place with narrowed eyes. "A little to the left," she said. Helen adjusted it. Chloe grinned. "Perfect." She stepped back and studied the framed deed with reverence, as if it were an oil painting in a museum. "Safe forever." Helen didn't respond. She was looking at it too, but her gaze saw deeper than paper. She saw nights spent doubting herself, days of silence after betrayal, the weight of worry she'd carried on her shoulders while pretending everything was fine. All of it sealed now, not just in ink, but in legacy. Irene breezed through the back door without knocking, arms full of groceries and sass. "I brought pie," she announced, "because celebration should always include sugar and fat." She stopped cold when she saw the frame on the wall. "Well, damn," she whispered. "You actually did it." "No one can touch it now," Chloe said, beaming. Irene set the bag down and crossed her arms. "This house, this land, this peace, it's all yours now, not just by survival, But by declaration, Helen glanced at her. Is that the legal term for it? No, Martin said, stepping in behind Irene, holding a manila folder. But it's not far off. He walked to the mantel and looked up at the framed deed with quiet satisfaction. It's all recorded. City registrar updated. Probate closed. Challenges barred. You couldn't be more protected unless you turned the whole place into a bunker. Helen chuckled. Tempting, Martin handed her the folder. For your records. Backup copy. Lockbox ready. Helen took it, then laid it beside the scrapbook Chloe had made. 2 documents. One born from love, one born from survival. Both unbreakable. You know, Martin added, his voice softer now. Most people don't live to see the protection of their legacy happen in real time. They write it, hope for the best, and die before the outcome unfolds. But you watched it close, like a story you authored yourself. Helen nodded. That's what I needed. To see the ground settle, she looked back at the deed. The seal glinted slightly in the afternoon light, casting a faint reflection onto the mantel like a silent emblem. The grave she dug wasn't mine, Helen said. Her voice didn't shake. Chloe stepped forward and hugged her tight around the waist. It's hers. Helen wrapped her arms around her granddaughter, pressing her cheek gently to the top of Chloe's head. Outside, the wind picked up, rustling the brittle leaves across the yard, the last echoes of summer finally being swept away. Do you think she knows it's really over? Chloe asked. Helen didn't answer for a moment. Then, she'll figure it out. That's the thing about digging graves. You eventually fall in your own. Irene raised her mug of tea like a toast. Here's to closing the door and throwing away the spare key. Martin smiled, packing his papers back into his briefcase. And here's to never needing to open it again. Helen let the silence sit. It wasn't heavy. It was full. A life not reclaimed, but rebuilt, on paper, in blood, and in memory. She glanced at the clock. It was still off by 7 minutes. She didn't care. Time, for once, was hers. Chloe reached over to turn the page of her scrapbook and paused, finger hovering over a blank space left at the end. Should we add the deed here? She asked. Helen smiled. No, honey, that belongs on the wall. Some things should be seen every day as the light shifted and the wind faded. The frame glowed just slightly above the hearth, the final line etched in ink and soul. My daughter smirked. You're halfway in the grave. So I buried her future first.